What's up, Earth? I've been avoiding making this video for a long time. And I was sitting here in the parking lot of this random North Hollywood parking lot. And I decided I was going to make it. It's not that hunting is wrong, but it is out of date. The belief system that a human being needs to eat meat to not just survive but thrive is based on wrong information. The information that exists today in 2018, today's February 9th, information that's accessible to everybody because of the internet, which made Earth like a village and condensed the experience of the widespread trickling of information from past generations. I was born in 1990, so I've had access to this thing called the internet for quite some time. And yet I lived in a culture and in an environment that did not promote such information regarding diet outside of a carnivorous diet. My spiritual awakening began at 17, but 19 it intensified. By 22 it had really intensified. By 23 I no longer associated with the self that I had come to know as myself, and so I was in this identity crisis and really confused as to what was me. And then at age 24 I started seeing angelic beings, specifically this being that I would later come to know was referred to by other humans and other beings as Michael, as a archangel Michael, or as a prime angle at which light got to me in this third dimension. That's all context and not what this video is about. This video is about me disagreeing with how my family, particularly my dad, everybody else kind of just follows him because he's a scary guy when you disagree with him. He usually has a weapon on him. He's 6'3", and he's one of the most charismatic people that you may ever meet. His birthday is December 13th, and he's one of the most Sagittarian dudes I've ever met, or at least the archetype of that I've come to know as a Sagittarian. But with this new Ophiuchus sign, I'm not even sure what that makes him. It's just me referencing right now that there is a paradigm shift and that eating animals is part of the old paradigm. The age of Aquarius and this age of enlightenment that I know is happening, and people like Eckhart Tolle refer to as the beginning of the global or collective awakening into what he refers to as the new earth. And I've come to understand it that those who stay on old earth are really just staying in a lower vibrational frequency than those who enter new earth. Lower vibrational frequency, for those of you who don't understand what that means, it refers to the emotional spectrum, and it refers to the emotional psychosomatic experience of the human experience. The spectrum of the human experience goes from very low emotions, mostly generally identified as fear-based, and then higher emotional states or states of vibration, which emotion is energy moving not on our physical body, although it can be measured in the physical body, but as yoga showed me, there are sheaths or shells or aspects of that which we are, that which we call self, that is not physical. Emotion, or the experience of motion, points to this. consuming a life form that was able to experience emotion puts those emotions and those vibrations and those frequency just energy, and you can't see it with your eyes, but frequency and energy are words we use to point at this stuff. Quantity or quality of vibration, or quality of vibration, and you're putting that in your stomach. So I grew up killing deer and thinking that it was not only just necessary, but actually morally superior to how others live their lives. And I grew up living in a perspective that it seemed like the world was against me and my family, that we had this belief system that was actually superior morally and ethically. And I grew up with a pretty large backyard, several hundred acres, and part of my chores or responsibilities for being a part of this family, where my father had attained a relatively large amount of success financially, so it allowed us to experience things of material luxury. Amongst that, there were responsibilities, duties, chores that I had to do, amongst other things like shoveling dog poop and stuff, and shoveling snow and regular things. Regular, like majority of human population, regular, common, I suppose. Was amongst those were things like gutting deer. And not to say that I was a young boy with a knife in my hand splitting open the bellies of deer and then looking at the guts by myself, but I was participating with my father often. And it was always gross to me. It was always disgusting to me. It was not a good smell. The entire process was vile. I remember quivering. I remember shaking. Death itself seemed to be very unpleasant, and yet by the time I was 13, I was taking rifles and shooting large animals, large mammals. And my family's economic structure, or one of the means in which they sustain their life, is through a television show that documents the killing of such animals. And this was, part of my reality, part of what I considered norm, part of what I considered to be regular, normal, and didn't have context for anything other than that. I've now come to a perspective that at this current moment, I'm 27, and I have been studying the art and science that is yoga, an ancient practice that originated in India, that it mentions the benefits of a vegetarian diet specifically. I've been the label that refers to that which I abide by in terms of my dietary protocol. The label is vegan, that I've been that since, you can call it plant-based, there's other terms, but since 2015. And in that time, I've seen, and coming into contact with other findings and other ways of life, and some people do this, some people do that, I've found what worked best for me to experience the highest quality of life that I was capable of experiencing. I also noticed this really strange component of my desire for wellness, my desire for my own, I just wanted to be well. I was physically unwell, I was really sick. In 2014, I was in the hospital, and they were like, you've got this thing called Epstein-Barr virus, your immune system is basically gone, you may have adrenal fatigue for the rest of your life, all you can do is rest, and maybe go to somebody who knows about nutrition. So I went to a nutritionist and a couple nutritionists. Interesting consonants in that word. And this nutritionist gave me their angle on what they thought I should consume. Even as a kid, I remember doctors were like, oh, you're lactose intolerant, so drink this milk called Lactaid, which is like milk, but it's not regular milk. It's still from a cow, but it's doesn't have dairy in it. I actually still don't know what that is. And I realized in my own desire for wellness that consuming animal products for me, it is actually part of why I had social anxiety from a pretty young age. I, as a kid, thought that farting and burping were components of humor that were desirable, and yet outside of privacy of closed family doors, it caused me deep fear and anxiety of relaxing in my body. That if I feared that if I relaxed in my body, I would poop my pants, because I usually had to poop, because I was, or fart, or release in some way. There was release always wanting to happen, and yet I was terrified of it happening because I didn't know what was going to happen. But there was pressure, very physically. I felt pressure on my stomach, and really just summarized as discomfort. And so I began this process of moving towards a plant-based diet. And in the process of this movement towards a plant-based diet, I noticed that I was addicted, not really to ingredients in food that wasn't from plants, but I had this emotional, psychological clinging connectedness, but like fear of letting it go, fear of no longer eating certain snacks, certain meals, certain textures that I had identified as pleasant, and that I had identified as giving me pleasure or giving me ease, providing me with various aspects of comfort. And the term comfort food points at it. And it also, for me, asks a question like, why is it providing comfort? And what is it providing comfort to? And this brings me to one of my more severe findings in my exploration of identity, my exploration of who I am and what I am. That as a human being, I've experienced myself in my mind, I've experienced myself in my heart, I've experienced myself in my body, I've experienced so many different aspects of when people point at me and say, you, or I use the word Rocco to describe that which I am. It points at the physical body. The physical body is like a reference point for where I am. And yet when people point at me, or I point at myself in the mirror, I'm looking out of my eyes, and I'm looking at my head, I'm like, that's me, I'm in there. I'm not really contained in there, though. I seem to interface with others, other humans, through the head. The head is where I'm speaking from and looking from, and the body is like how I move about and control aspects of my experience here as a human. And yet I can close my eyes and I can see things, I can see pictures, and I can also intensify my concentration towards memories, and I can hear components of what that memory is. And so my exploration of identity led me to find this fork in the road in what seems to me to be the main difference in identification in the human experience, meaning the entire human population on Earth. That there are two main forks in the road for how every human being, how every living, sentient human life form on this earth identifies himself. There's a fork in the road. That fork in the road is ego or soul. And the ego it points at this dynamic of the self, the person or the thing that we're calling the self. I grew up saying, yeah, that's mine, or I like this, mine, myself, well, me, myself, I prefer, da, da, da. It's all these references to the me and this I, and I was coming from this place. And then there's the soul. I can speak from the same exact place with words and not really have an identifiable difference in the language that I'm using, at least from on the surface of just listening, listening and hearing the words that I speak. I still use I still use me, more or less, but in my exploration of identity, I found that, okay, if there are these multiple components or various components of the human, and therefore of me, and therefore of self, what am I supposed to be doing? And I think everybody, if you've been on Earth for a good amount of time, you've heard about this dude named Jesus. And a lot of people believe a lot of different things about this character's name. I've heard a story. I don't know about you, but I heard a story about a guy who was a little different from the rest of people, and ended up being put on a cross because he was talking about some stuff that the people in power didn't want him to talk about. And it seemed to be about, in a nutshell, love, about living a life as if the human body itself was not the real or most true component of the experience. That he was speaking of the human experience as though that which was truly imbibing the human, or rather animating the human, was this light, or was this consciousness that was not limited to the physical body. And this light of consciousness he referred to as Christ, and he referred to it as a lot of different things. And I found also that this component of the human experience was referenced and identified by many other people, humans. This dude Siddhartha, he was given a title upon realizing a similar component of the nature of human life. He was given a title of Buddha, and other people have walked the earth and pointed at similar things, and yet those two dudes are relatively well known, depending on where you're from. If you're from Earth and you've lived on Earth for a little while, you may have heard of him. And so it led me to this really conflicting place, because it seemed like if I were to feed my body anything, that it was going to produce an effect. There was a cause and an effect. The cause was really actually quite deeper than what I was even choosing to put in my mouth, but what I put in my mouth to eat, to digest for food, did lead to an effect. And I found that the more clean I ate, clean meaning as it relates to the digestive system and the effects of the little molecular chemical components of the contents of the food that I was eating, and their ease in being digested. And I found information that basically pointed at animal products taking much longer to digest and requiring more energy and more effort from the body to be digested. And and then I saw some piece of information about, plants are green for, some aren't, some are other things, other colors, but this rainbow of colors did seem to land in the middle at the color green. And the color green was the color green because, in terms of plants, because of this photonic process where they basically receive light, and I actually don't have all the information on why they're green. I think it's really interesting though. And I also think it's very interesting about how green isn't, I was going to say it's not a primary color, but I don't know that either. But you get green by mixing blue and yellow. And I thought it was cool that the ocean's blue and the sun is yellow. And then most of land, not most of land, but a lot of land, some land on Earth is green. And then I saw this chart from yoga. I'd seen it before yoga, but then yoga kind of told me about what I had seen. And it was this depiction of the human body with this kind of like rainbow circles on them. And the yoga teaching gave me some context as to what I had heard the character called Jesus talking about when I was a kid. And this light and this consciousness and stuff. And now where I'm at with it is that I've discovered and found to be true for myself and many others that I've come into contact with through communication and knowing and understanding on this journey of life, that eating plants is like eating light. Eating animals actually eat plants. There's a handful of carnivorous animals out there, but they even eat animals that eat plants. And so it seems like plants were the real life force. It seemed like the sun was the real life force. But it seemed like green was most conducive to feeding the light aspect of the human. That by eating meat, it was feeding a different part of the human. And it seemed to contribute to the existence of the ego, which wasn't the light and the consciousness, the non-physical component, but rather it was this sheath or membrane-like component of what the light or consciousness identified as the physical body. That the ego seemed to be attached to the physical body, not the physical body, but it's like the psychological, emotional, non-physical component of identification of the physical body. Almost like we are, as consciousness, aware of a physical body and also aware of our non-physical aspects. And yet there's a part of us that identifies as the body and takes ownership in the body and claims the body as its own, that it is it and that it owns it, that it's like it belongs to it. And yet consciousness doesn't really refer to the body like that. And so I found in my experience that ego is really what's wanting meat at this point because of the information. There's holding on to a belief system that doesn't serve our higher nature. We're expanding and we're growing and we're evolving. And meat eating doesn't serve our evolution as a species. There are various blood types of people, of humans, and there are some blood types that this doctor, he wrote a book about blood types and the diets that serve their ideal life. And there are some blood types that say that meat and animal products, basically animal products or animal protein, will contribute to this type of person with this blood type as living a healthy life. I found that there are genetic propensities or genetic inclinations. This is what DNA points at. And yet, the light of consciousness itself, it's more interested in emotional ease. That as a life form, as a human, we want our life to be joyful. We look at the spectrum of human beings out there and we say, like, what kind of life do I want to live? We don't want pain and agony, yet some of us come into contact with tremendous pain and tremendous agony, and that usually produces the desire for the absence of the pain and agony. There seems to be a desire for an upward spiral. An upward spiral meaning a spiral away from lower and up and towards upper, and using that as a reference towards the emotional spectrum, experienceable, I don't know if that's a word, that's able to be experienced by the human. You don't want the lower stuff, you want the higher stuff. And so it seems like as a collective there's this clinging to old ways of many things, but of eating and of feeding ourselves, sometimes because of lack of information, and sometimes because the egoic construct has manipulated our belief system to think, causing us to believe that we should do something when it's actually not in our best interest. Trauma can lead us to desire things that are in our worst interest, because the trauma creates an impact on the light that we are, and the physical body becomes dormant in certain places, or the mind becomes dormant in certain places where this trauma impacted. And so I found that the family that I come from has trauma. It has trauma around love. It has trauma around belonging. And there's fearful clinging to a way of life that does not serve their higher nature. I've been vegan around my family for a while now, and I'm not here to like make them want something, but I am here to talk to other people that may be interested in moving out of lower vibrational states and interested in moving towards higher vibrational states for their own well-being and their own experience of light. And so maybe there's somebody in your life that's holding on to something that you know doesn't serve them. You really can lead a horse to water, but you genuinely can't make it drink. I've never personally actually grabbed a horse or rode a horse to water and experienced this, but it does seem to be I think the word's colloquialism, but it's like a story. You lead a horse to water, but you can't make it drink. I've never led a horse to water. I've also never tried to make a horse drink. I've seen horses drink water, but I've personally never walked with a horse to water and even attempted to make it drink. But it does seem to be a true sentiment. I feel like you could do this with other animals as well. You can't make an animal drink. You can't really make anybody do anything. But you can be truth. You can be your own truth. And sometimes your truth may go against others that you love. It may go against the truth that they think is true. And then it may cause an argument. And maybe you're not interested in an argument. Maybe you're not interested in any type of engagement like that. But it's not wrong or right, but I can tell you there's better and worse. And if you're talking about the spectrum of potential experiences in the human experience, I'd like to see you make a case for meat eating contributing in any way to a better life as a human being. Thanks for watching this video. Share it if you feel compelled to, or don't. Check out other videos. Vibes.